Good morning, first graders. It is time for our Chris Van Allsburg story of the day, The Stranger. Take a look at this guy. He's obviously the stranger. What do you notice about him? Do the eyes stand out to you? They sure did to me. All right, let's find out about this fellow. Here is your 2-sentence summary. I'll read it to you first. One day, Farmer Bailey hits a stranger with his truck and brings him home to recover. After the stranger lives with the Bailey family, strange things begin to happen with the weather. So here's your summary. Take a picture of it, whatever you need to do. Stop the video to make sure you can get it copied down. All right. All right, the question of the day is, who was the stranger? Who does he represent? Give evidence from the story to support your theory. Okay, so hopefully you watched the clip that I posted before the link to this video, because that is going to give you all kinds of schema to figure out who the stranger is. So it's really important that you watch that clip. If you haven't, stop this video immediately and go watch it. Otherwise, you're probably not going to know who this guy is. If you watch it, pay attention to the character in that clip and what kinds of things he does, okay? And also figure out who his name is. If you can't answer those questions, go back and watch that clip a couple times so you can figure it out. All right, so if you watch that clip, you should a few times and understand it, you'll be able to figure out who the stranger is. And who does he represent? That's the character's name from the clip. And give evidence from your story to support your theory. So if your theory is the stranger is this person, and think about what that stranger did in the clips, because you're going to see some evidence that of the person in this book doing the same thing. I hope that makes sense. All right, without further ado, here's the story of the stranger. Like always, keep on the lookout for Fritz. It's trickier in this book. It's a lot trickier in this book to find him. Here we go. The Stranger. Mrs. Shen gave me this book for my birthday a while ago. The Stranger. All right. Here's your opening picture. It was the time of year Farmer Bailey liked best. When summer turned to fall, he whistled as he drove along. A cool breeze blew across his face through the truck's open window. Then it happened. There was a loud thump. Mr. Bailey jammed on his brakes. Oh no, he thought. I've hit a deer. It's starting to look like fall, right, friends? But it wasn't a deer. The farmer found lying in the road. It was a man. Mr. Bailey knelt down beside the still figure, fearing the worst. Then suddenly the man opened his eyes. He looked up with terror and jumped to his feet. He tried to run off, lost his balance, and fell down. He got up again, but this time the farmer took his arm and helped him into the truck. Mr. Bailey drove home. He helped the stranger inside. When Mrs. Bailey made him comfortable on the parlor sofa, Katie, their daughter, peeked into the room. The man on the sofa was dressed in odd, rough leather clothing. She heard her father whispered, "Must be some kind of hermit, sort of fellow who lives alone in the woods." The stranger didn't seem to understand the question. Mr. Bailey asked him. "I don't think so," whispered Mrs. Bailey. "He knows how to talk." "I don't think," whispered Mrs. Bailey, "he knows how to talk." All right, you're about to start getting clues about who this character is. Not this guy. This is the doctor, okay? But the mother, Mrs. Bailey, is holding something in her hand here. Mr. Bailey called the doctor, who came and listened to the stranger's heart, felt his bones, looked in his eyes, and took his temperature. He decided the man had lost his memory. There was a bump on the back of his head. In a few days, the doctor said, he should remember who he is and where he's from. Mrs. Bailey stopped the door as he left the house. He'd forgotten his thermometer. You can throw that out, he answered. It's broken. The mercury is stuck at the bottom. The mercury is the stuff in old-fashioned thermometers that rises. They don't make thermometers with mercury anymore. But it's the stuff on the bottom of an old-fashioned thermometer that tells the temperature. The doctor's saying it's broken. The mercury is stuck at the bottom. So, interesting. Mr. Bailey lent the stranger some clean clothes. The fellow seemed confused about buttonholes and buttons. In the evening, he joined the Baileys for dinner. The steam that rose from the hot food fascinated him. He watched Katie take a spoonful of soup and blow gently across it. Then he did exactly the same thing. Mrs. Bailey shivered. "Brrr," she said. "There's a draft in here tonight." So when the stranger blew, on the soup, gently across it, there was a draft in the room. Interesting. The next morning, Katie watched the stranger from her bedroom window. He walked across the yard toward two rabbits. Instead of running into the woods, the rabbits took a hop in his direction. He picked one of them up, stroked its ears, and then set it down. The rabbits hopped away, then stopped and looked back, as if they expected the stranger to follow them. When Katie's father went to the fields that day, the stranger shyly tagged along. Mr. Bailey gave him a pitchfork, and with a practice, he learned to use it well. They worked hard. Occasionally, Mr. Bailey would have to stop and rest, but the stranger never tired. He didn't even sweat. The stranger's looking up at these birds. That evening, Katie sat with the stranger watching the setting sun. High above them, a flock of geese in perfect V formation flew south on the trip that they made every fall. The stranger could not take his eyes off the birds. He stared at them like a man who'd been hypnotized. 2 weeks passed, and the stranger still could not remember who he was. But the Baileys didn't mind. They liked having the stranger around. He had become one of the family. Day by day, he'd grown less timid. "He seems so happy to be around us," Mr. Bailey said to his wife. "It's hard to believe he's a hermit." Remember, that's someone who lives alone in the woods. Another week passed. Farmer Bailey could not help noticing how peculiar the weather had been. Not long ago, it seemed like autumn was just around the corner, but now it felt like summer, as if the seasons couldn't change. The warm days made the pumpkins grow larger than ever. The leaves on the trees were as green as they'd been 3 weeks before. Interesting. So the leaves on the trees are not changing color. Oh, look at this. This is interesting. They're changing color over here, but not right here on the Bailey's farm. Very interesting. One day, the stranger climbed the highest hill on the Bailey farm. He looked to the north and saw a puzzling sight. The trees in the distance were bright red and orange. But the trees to the south, like those around the Baileys, were nothing but shades of green. They seemed so drab and ugly to the stranger. It would be much better, he thought, if all the trees could be red and orange. That's that's the picture of someone who's just remembered something. What do you think? The stranger's feelings grew stronger the next day. He couldn't look at the tree's green leaves without sensing that something was terribly wrong. The more he thought about it, the more upset he became, until finally he could think of nothing else. He ran to a tree and pulled off a leaf. He held it in a trembling hand and, without thinking, blew on it with all his might. Look at what happened when he blew on it. At dinner that evening, the stranger appeared dressed in his old leather clothes. By the tears in his eyes, the Baileys could tell that their friend had decided to leave. He hugged them all once, then dashed out the door. The Baileys hurried outside to wave goodbye, but the stranger had disappeared. The air had turned cold, and the leaves on the trees were no longer green. Oh, that's interesting. So the second the stranger left, the trees changed colors. Every autumn, since the stranger's visit, the same thing happens at the Bailey's farm. The trees that surround it stay green for a week after the trees to the north have turned. Then overnight, they change their color to the brightest of any tree around. And etched in frost on the farmhouse windows are words that say simply, "See you next fall." So, do you guys ever do that when you want to do your hot breath on it and then you write in it, like in the shower? This is different though. Someone has done cold breath and has written in the cold on the window with the words, "See you next fall." So hopefully, by watching that clip that I posted, you now know who the stranger is. And answering this question won't be so difficult. Oh, it fell down. Which was, who was the stranger? Who does he represent? Give evidence from the story to support your theory. So figure out who that guy was and what kinds of things did he do that support who he is, okay? All right, friends, I hope you enjoyed today's Chris Van Allsburg story called The Stranger.